The purpose of the Unknown Solutions Lab was to determine the identity of 8 unknown substances through how they react with each other. To complete this lab, my partner and I took one of the unknown substances at a time and mixed it with the other 7 to see how they reacted together. We repeated this process until each of the individual substances were mixed with every other one. We were looking for chemical reactions which are formed through energy being absorbed or released, otherwise known as endothermic and exothermic reactions. This way, the atoms either break apart or they form to create new substances. On the macroscopic level, we had to look for gas being formed, a precipitate, or color and temperature changes. After we mixed the substances, the results of the reaction and our observations were recorded. Several of the substances didn't react at all. Some formed a gas, and some produced a precipitate as a result of a chemical reaction. The table provided shows what we recorded as a result to the observations of the substances reacting together. To be able to understand the table we have laid out into a form where each of the substances are in the far left of the table and each of the substance we reacted it with across the top. From there, we put our observations down. Although they are listed twice, each process is only tested once and the table is set up to read easier. When it came down to figuring out how to identify each unknown substance, the solutions had to be specific to the one that was being tested. These substances were labeled A through H, and as you can see, our job was to identify what each substance was. And those results are on the right side of this table.
In each square, we recorded whether there was a reaction and what we observed during the reaction. So now we'll explain how we identified each substance. Substance C was easy to identify because it didn't react with anything, which means it had to be distilled water. Distilled water is soluble with most solutions and it will never react. Hydrochloric acid, or the solution that we determined to be H, only reacts with 2 of the other substances. The way we determined it was H was through its formation of gas when mixed with solution F. No other gas formed in any of the other solutions, which only goes to show that F had to be sodium carbonate. When an acid or carbonate react with each other, they release a gas. The way we arrived at the solutions we did when figuring out whether H or F was hydrochloric acid or sodium carbonate was that sodium carbonate mixed with 4 of the other substances. The 2 other substances that hydrochloric acid reacts with are silver nitrate and potassium iodide, and the 4 that sodium carbonate mix with are calcium chloride, silver nitrate, copper sulfate, and potassium iodide. Because silver nitrate and potassium iodide react with hydrochloric acid, they have to either be substances B or G. That leaves substances A, D, and E to be decided. Because the lead nitrate was the only other substance besides distilled water to not react with sodium carbonate, it had to be substance E. This leaves 2 substances behind to be determined, copper sulfate and calcium chloride. Because calcium chloride and copper sulfate cannot mix due to calcium's higher reactivity levels, that suggests that calcium chloride has to be substance A and copper sulfate substance D. Copper sulfate mixes with potassium iodide, but calcium chloride does not.
In review, we identified A as calcium chloride,
B as silver nitrate,
C as distilled water,
D as copper sulfate,
E as lead nitrate,
F as sodium carbonate,
G as potassium iodide,
H as hydrochloric acid.